Good morning. Welcome to the grand finale. Well, I guess that's not what you usually say for a final lecture is the grand finale, but whatever. It's linguistics. We can say whatever words we want. Um, Today we're going to talk about the principle of cooperation and Grice's maxims in a linguistic sense, and then we're going to relate it to humor, and then that's going to be it. And then we'll wrap up the course. And if you have any questions about test 3 or anything on assignment 6 or any of the material, we'll take it from there. So it's probably only going to be about 45 minutes ish for content. So we won't do a break or anything. We'll just plow on through and then it'll end when it ends. Oh, okay. Put my subtitles on. So we're going to quickly review implicature since pragmatics is in the domain, or implicature is part of pragmatics, and Grice's maxims uses implicature, and it's been like 12 weeks since we've seen it. And then we'll talk about Grice's maxims. Hello, keyboard.
What we go over today is not going to be on the test, right?
No. Hold on one second. My pen is not on the right screen, I don't believe. Or my pen is dead. Okay, it was dead. So the simple solution has fixed it. There we go. Okay, so here is a very formal definition of implicature that we didn't see at the beginning of the course, but um, we've seen a bunch of formal definitions at this point, so we can just sort of read it and try to understand it. So remember, the conventional sense of an implicature is basically what we expect when we hear something, based on language expectations or real world expectations. When someone says something, um, we have ideas about what they mean to say. So formally, we can say that an utterance of sentence S, so what the speaker says, has P as its implicature, just in case in uttering S, the speaker invites the hearer to infer that the speaker is making a commitment to P. So this is like a very formal way of saying that when a speaker says some sentence and means something else, uh, they're letting the listener know that they can make that inference. So a nice example here, as a reminder, is like John is English and he is cowardly compared to John is English but he is cowardly. So although in semantics we've been treating and but as the same thing, truth conditionally, these are both sentences where if you take, say, two propositions P and Q, and we build a little truth table for these, uh, they both function as the and operator in semantics. But in terms of meaning and implicature, they work a little bit differently. If you hear and, it's just simply A and B, our truth table. But with but, it's our truth table and a little bit more. There's this element of contrast, this element of surprise in a way. And it's not like a wow surprising. It's like this notion that one of the clauses is true in spite of the second clause also happening. So John is English, but he is cowardly. Um, it would this implies that it's surprising that John is English despite his cowardness. There's an implication here that most English people would not be cowardly. Now, whether this is true or not, of course, it's just a made up stereotype for this example. But you can tell that there's a difference between these words when we speak them. And you would never typically use and in the place of but, or but in the place of and, like if there is no contrast or if there's not contrast. So depending on if there's contrast or not, you would use one of the two different connectives in writing. And that's to get that implicature. So just a little reminder that words have meaning beyond the literal meaning that we've been discussing in the course. So in 1975, Grice came up with this theory about the principle of cooperation, which is all about conversation. Because the question is, how do we uh, talk with each other in a way that is productive? How do we regulate conversation? Especially when so many things that we say are non-literal. We have so many different inferences. How do we know that we're making the right inferences? Um, how do we know not to be misled and make the wrong inferences in conversation? So the general idea is that most of us, uh, when we're being good interlocutors, good participants in conversation, it's another way of saying that, is that we follow this thing called the principle of cooperation. And this is exactly what Paul Grice has said. So this is a direct quote from the principle of cooperation. Make your conversational contribution such as is required at the stage at which it occurs by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk in which you are engaged. So this is basically saying say what you need to, when you need to, and stay on task or stay on topic. Now, of course, in conversations, we do not always follow these rules. I mean, these aren't rules; these are just conventions. Our whole goal of a conversation is to just talk with each other and communicate, and usually solve a problem or ask questions or get information from each other. So, as humans, we just do our best to be cooperative. At least if we're trying to have the conversation, if we're trying to withhold information or be sneaky or interrupt people or prevent information, we're not going to follow this principle. But if we're trying to be good speakers in a conversation, we'll follow this and we'll see the different rules or different conventions that people tend to follow. So we're going to talk about 4 conversational maxims, and for each of these maxims, they can be what's called flouted, or they can be violated, or they can be followed. So if you follow a maxim, you're basically just following the rule. You're behaving appropriately. That is not interesting to us, at least in pragmatics. That's not interesting to us. That's just behaving like a good conversational citizen. What we're interested is when people choose not to follow them. And this breaks down into uh, not necessarily intentional versus unintentional, but whether or not someone is trying to mislead or disrupt the conversation or not. So if a speaker flouts a maxim, so the word flouting here, this means that a speaker is still trying to cooperate. So they're cooperating, they're trying to progress the conversation, and they're trying to have everyone understand what's being said. But they ignore one of the maxims, one of the rules, let's say in order to make like a metaphor. Uh, in order to have someone infer more information. And we'll see examples of this. But when we talk about flouting, the people are still cooperating. When we talk about violating, if a speaker violates one of our rules, uh, they are not cooperating. They are intentionally trying to mislead others or trying to lie to others or trying to withhold information in order to not progress the conversation and trying to not to cooperate within the conversation. So We're going to focus on flouting, but I'm going to show you one example of a violation as we look at these maxims. So just keep in mind that although we're talking about these conversational rules and conventions, um, we're not supposed to follow these as humans. We're supposed to sort of break the rules. It's just whether you break the rules in a cooperating way that's flouting, which is good for conversation, or whether you're breaking those rules in a non-cooperative way, which is a violation, um, which doesn't really help the conversation. So this will make more sense as we talk about it. So let's actually talk about the maxims and we can see examples of this. So here are the four maxims. You might have seen these before, and you might have seen these with very slightly different names. It depends on when you grab the names from these. I don't know why some of these have different names. Okay, but anyways, um, the first maxim, and I've condensed these. These have much longer descriptions, but I've taken the longer descriptions and I've summarized them as concisely as I can. So if you look at these online, you'll see uh, longer descriptions of these. The maxim of relation says that in a conversation, you should be relevant. And what does that mean? That means that if you're on topic or talking about a particular thing, that means on topic, you should keep talking about that particular thing. And if you're going to transition to something else, you should make a transition to something else. You shouldn't just abruptly shift the conversation because that would be uncooperative. So basically, the maximum relation is, stay on topic, be relevant. The maximum of quantity tells you to be only as informative as required. So what this means is that if you're making a contribution to the conversation, and let's say you know some information, you should contribute that information, not too little, and you should not contribute more than you have to. So you should just contribute the right amount of information. The maximum of quality says that you should only say what you know to be true or what you believe to be true. Believe to be true would be a better way to put this since you don't always know what is true, but you have beliefs that are true, or information that you have evidence for. And let's say you want to say something that isn't true or that you don't know is true, then you could always say something like I think or I believe. And that would be following the maximum quality because you're just stating a fact. You're providing something that's true. And the last one, the maximum manner, just means that when you contribute something to a conversation, uh, you should say it in a way that's brief and understandable, and that can be interpreted in the way that you want it to be interpreted, which is not always the easiest thing to do. So if you have an ambiguous sentence, like I shot an elephant in my pajamas, you should probably rephrase that sentence in a way that doesn't have ambiguity. So if you were following these perfectly, that would be something you could do. Um, if you're trying to convey information and you say 200 words when you could have said 50 words, then you probably should have said it in 50 words. Now, this is if you're following Grice's maxims to a T, like completely. But humans don't do that. We're not robots. We're gonna, take our liberties, and I mean, we're ruled by brains that are imperfect. We make speech errors. We need to think about things. We rephrase our ideas. We talk before we're even finished thinking about our thoughts. So it's not going to be possible to follow these completely. Um, but now let's talk about the times where we intentionally choose not to follow these. And we can see an example of each of these in context by taking a look at when we choose not to follow them. And Sometimes with flouting, it's difficult to figure out the line between one maxim and another. So sometimes when you flout one maxim, you end up flouting another, and that's okay. So here's an example where we flout the maxim of quantity. So I'll sort of just write the cliff notes of what each one of these means. So how much you say, and the maxim of relation, which is relevance, how on topic you are. And when we flout these things, as a reminder, why we reviewed implicature is that we are creating implicatures by flouting these. We're trying to get people to infer things by flouting these maxims. That's why we flout these maxims, because we want people to get other ideas. And this is where the humor comes in later, because we flout maxims and then we're trying to get this other interpretation in people's heads, and that makes them laugh. But these ones are just linguistics. So here's one for a recommendation letter for grad school. And this is something you don't want to happen to you. So um, imagine someone is writing a recommendation letter for you. And in a recommendation letter, usually what's asked are things like academic qualities. Like, how does the student perform in classes? How do they perform in research? What is their personality like in terms of communication skills, in terms of working with others? So imagine that's all that's written about a student is something like John has a nice smile and has great handwriting. Like, imagine that's it. So, what's happened in this letter, if this is all that's said, is first of all, there's not enough information being given. The question asked, usually in a recommendation letter, is, w- the things I just said, like, how's the academic performance? That information's not there. How is the personality communication wise working with others? That's not there. So what does it mean when that information's not there? Two, what was said about the handwriting and nice smile, it's not really relevant to the question. Yeah, sure, it's about John, but again, it's not really relevant in terms of graduate school. So why isn't that information there? And that's because really what's being implied here um, is that John is not recommended for this school. But the person writing the letter doesn't want to say that outright. They don't want to be rude. They just want to submit the recommendation letter and just sort of like in a covert way say, I would not recommend this student. So by not giving enough information and not being on topic here, they're basically saying this is not a good recommendation. Now, why would you choose to do this? Well, if you compare A and B here, John has a nice smile and has great handwriting compared to John is not a smart student. Uh, which one would you write if you're trying to write a formal letter to a university for a student recommendation? I mean, one of these is a little bit ruder than the others. You might choose to write A just because it makes you look a little bit more polite in a letter than just being very explicit and saying John is not as smart or John is not a good student. I mean, smart really isn't uh, the best thing to write in terms of like overall quality. Smartness isn't really a big deal. It's more about how hard someone works and how well someone can communicate. But you might choose to flout a maxim just to maintain politeness, to maintain face. So, I mean, this is like a real, well, it's not, this particular example isn't real, but this is something that you would see in the real world. So this is not giving enough information, and this is not being on topic to create an inference in order to save some face, to appear more polite. Here's another example that is very similar, but the topic is different. So a conversation between two people. So A says, "I do think Mrs. Jenkins is an old windbag, don't you?" And then B, instead of responding yes or no, completely changes the topic and says, "Huh, lovely weather for March, isn't it?" Now, what is being said by this topic shift? Because there's no relevance to what A has said. A is making a comment about Mrs. Jenkins. Sorry, if you don't know what old windbag is, um, this is sort of like an old mean person. Um, by shifting the topic, this person does not want to admit or say yes or no to this. Um, and getting the actual inference really depends on B's personality and how well we know B. Because there's two things that B could mean here. Um, if B knows Mrs. Jenkins and has a good relationship with Mrs. Jenkins, B might be shifting the topic just because B doesn't want to like argue with A. Um, but if B thinks that Mrs. Jenkins is also an old windbag, maybe B just doesn't want to be rude. And B agrees, but B just doesn't want to say it. Either way, really the implicature here that B is saying is I don't want to talk about it. But B didn't explicitly say that. But that's really kind of what B is saying here. B doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to make a statement about it. So B doesn't acknowledge A's question at all. B completely changes the subject. So this is one of those cases where natural language, we can't make a specific inference about what B thinks unless we know B. But we can infer for sure that B doesn't want to make a stance. And for whatever reason, this could be um, confrontation avoidance, or it could just be a lack of confidence, or, for whatever reason, just doesn't want to get into it. Are there any questions about these two examples? Okay, the maxim of quality can be used for metaphors. So this is a little bit different than what we've just seen. What we saw just now with quality and quantity, sorry, quantity and relevance, was used for mostly politeness and saving face, but quality can be used for literary purposes. So quality is about truth. And what I should say in brackets is that this is literal truth. So if you say something like, uh, Queen Victoria was made of iron, we know that Queen Victoria in real life was not actually made of iron. We know that this is not a real fact. We know that this is a metaphor. But um, if we all follow the principle of cooperation and we're all aware of it, and we know these Grice's maxims just subconsciously, whatever part of pragmatics this is, whatever part of our dialogue system this is, we know that made of iron is not literal. And because it's not literal, and we know that the person is trying to cooperate, we infer that this is a metaphor, because why else would they say it? So Queen Victoria has the properties of iron then. So we could say that Queen Victoria was hard. I mean, here we go. This is really another metaphor in itself, since Queen Victoria was probably not a physically hard person all over. This is probably another metaphor. Resilient and non-flexible. This is probably also another metaphor, or at least another description of the word, unless she physically was non-flexible too. But made of iron is not, of course, a literal description of her. It's a non-literal truth in order to get a metaphorical inference out of that. So really, I'm going to put metaphor slash lexical for lexical ambiguity there, because maybe lexical ambiguity is a better way of describing it. So a lot of the flouting equality comes for, or gives us metaphors, gives us idioms, gives us non-literal language use. Now, our last one, the maxim of manner. Manner is about being brief and being unambiguous. So sometimes, to be humorous, we might say something in a very convoluted way, or we might say something in a convoluted way in order to sound just a little bit less insulting. So here's one example. Miss Singer produced a series of sounds corresponding closely to the score of an aria. So produced a series of sounds corresponding closely to the score of an aria. This is a very convoluted way of saying that this person sang an aria and was not very good. So this is the part where we know that she sang one, and this is the part where we say that she produced a series of sounds corresponding closely to the score of it. So it's just a nice little convoluted way of saying that, she wasn't very good at singing. So again, the inference here was really done sort of, what did I say? Politeness. That's what I wrote. That's what I'm thinking in my head. Sort of out of politeness, in quotation marks. It's not really being polite, because the way that they're saying it is sort of snarkier than if they just said, "Oh, that wasn't that good." But it's not as explicit as just saying it's bad, but it's still said in a pretty rude way. But it does take the humorous route by sort of coming up with an alternative description that people don't expect. So I put humorous in quotation marks there, because it's really just insult humor. But with all of these examples, these are all examples of flouting, because the inference that we're trying to get is still relevant to the conversation. It's still trying to make progress, to the context. When you say Queen Victoria was made of iron, um, whatever the context is, you're still giving a picture of Queen Victoria that is relevant. If you say Miss Singer produced a series of sounds corresponding closely to the score of an aria, I mean, this is still probably relevant to the conversation. You're making a comment about the performance, but you're just not wanting to say anything explicitly bad. You're just wanting to say it in a roundabout way. So you're still contributing. You're just not contributing in a literal, explicit sense. So in regular conversation, linguistically, this is how we can flout maxims. I want to give you one example of violation. Okay. So we're going to violate quality here. And violating quality is really the easiest. This is when you tell someone basically a lie. So this is lying to people. I shouldn't put that in quotes. I should just say lying to people. So when you violate quality, you're doing this intentionally because it's a violation. So this is an intentional thing. You're trying not to cooperate. So for whatever reason, you want to give someone false information. So I don't know. Let's say someone is about to do like, I'm thinking back to like 2005. You see like a 12-year-old kid at a skateboard park or skate park. What are they called? Sure, I don't know. And they're about to do a trick that is like way too dangerous for them. And you say something like, "Yeah, dude, that trick is totally safe for you to do. You'll be totally fine." But in reality, it's very dangerous. So this is like completely misleading someone. If you're trying to egg someone on to do something that you know is unsafe, but you tell them it's going to be completely okay. This is a violation. You're being uncooperative. Uh, Another example, let's do like violating quantity. So this is something like withholding information. In fact, let me just make this a little bit wider. And let me just get rid of that there. This was really nice when like Among Us was popular because it was like a really um a really easy example. Uh when you withhold information, so whatever, it's only been what is it, like a year since it was popular. Um or let's say here we go, criminal investigations. If you murder someone in real life and the police interrogate you and they say and they ask you a question, usually what happens is people end up giving like these part truths. um so you'll have like a say something like, when did your wife leave the house this morning? And B will respond saying like, she left around 6 a.m. uh Now, at first, if you don't know the context, this might seem but like a reasonable answer, but there might be a situation where B knows specifically, like, um, actually, B knows she left at 6:30 a.m. with him and the kids, and by the way, she was already dead. So this is like withholding information. And this is, of course, withholding information for a purpose because the murderer doesn't want to get caught. But that's a very clear act of violating the maxims. And we all understand why someone would want to violate the maxim in that case, why someone would want to be uncooperative in that case, because they want to save themselves. Okay, are there any questions about that before we talk about how these relate to humor? Okay, so we'll talk about each of the maxims, one example with a joke, and then that'll be it. So, maxim of quantity. Some jokes are funny because we leave information out of the joke, or we give more information provided, and it's up to the person listening to the joke to fill in the blanks. And as soon as the person listening to the joke fills in the blanks and understands the information, then they laugh. So here's the joke. Context: person B is a dog walker walking their neighbor's dog. So person A walks by and asks, "Oh, does your dog bite?" Person B says, "No." Uh, the dog bites person A, and then person A says, "Well, then why did it bite me? You said that your dog doesn't bite." And then person B says, "Well, that's not my dog." So the joke here comes from person A saying, "Does your dog bite?" And of course, it's not B's dog. So B says no, because it's not B's dog. So by B saying no, uh, B is leaving out information. And this is what's sort of breaking the maximum quantity in this conversation that is making this funny in the end. So yeah, it's not B's dog. It's the neighbor's dog. So no, B's dog doesn't bite because it's not B's dog. So yeah, sometimes it's about the speaker not having information that makes it funny, and sometimes it's about the people in the conversation, in the joke, not having enough information that makes it funny. Maximum quality. This is okay. So maximum quality. Usually, you can also get like a little hint of sarcasm sometimes by violating quality. So this is where the humor comes from in this joke. If you find this funny. So, like a preteen boy goes to ICBC to get car insurance. The boy's been sitting for a long time in an empty room and he says, "There's no one else here. Why won't you call me up?" And then the staff responds and says, "Oh, we're just waiting for you to get your driver's license." So, of course, the staff does not mean this. This is, of course, not in fact truthful. The staff is not waiting for the boy to get the driver's license. But there's nothing that a preteen boy is going to be able to do at ICBC that is worth the staff's time. So, he's too young to be helped. So why would the staff help him? They're just being a little bit snarky. They're saying something untruthful to get the boy to leave. I know. It's very funny. So sarcasm and jokes and sort of snarky responses can lead you to uh, either flouting or violating quality. So sometimes there's flouting and sometimes there's violation in jokes. Jokes doesn't matter too much because cooperation isn't really a big part of jokes. It doesn't matter if someone is being cooperative or not. That's what makes it funny. While in conversations, we care about cooperation a little bit more.
Sorry, I don't get why the joke about maximum quality is supposed to be funny.
It's not really funny. To be honest, it's not really funny. It's just the staff being snarky at him, saying like, "We're waiting for you to get your driver's license," which is a way of telling the boy to stop like wasting his time sitting because he's not getting called up to the counter. Although the question itself that you just asked was very blunt and very humorous, so thank you. Does that mean I could have probably picked a better joke for the example that was funny? Yes. Uh, okay, I was caught. Here's a joke that's even less funny, but it's a linguistics joke, so I think it's hilarious. Um, the maxim of relation. This is when some jokes can happen when people answer questions in very unintended ways, or when people ask something in an unintended or unexpected way. Like when, of course, people are not being completely relevant to the question. So a linguist is teaching a course on syntax and asks, "What is the function of the first DP in the sentence, 'The teacher gave a pop quiz'?" And a student responds, "To teach people things." Now, if you didn't get it, that's okay. If you did get it, it's not that funny, but I love it. So what's happening here is, in terms of function, you're supposed to say the function of the teacher. What is supposed to be said in this case is that this is the subject of the sentence. So these are also called functions of DPs in sentences, sometimes in the realm of grammar. But what was said instead, rather than the linguistic function, was rather the function of the profession itself. What is the function of a teacher in society? And they said, to teach people things. It is what teachers do in society. So, by answering the question in a way that was unintended or unexpected, so sort of answering it in an irrelevant way to the course, um, it gives rise to some humor there. Because again, if we think about the incongruity model, what the linguist was expecting was syntax. What they ended up getting was profession. And then, of course, you get that incongruity there. Anyways, that's a really deep and nerdy syntax joke there. And by deep and nerdy, really, what I really mean is that it's not that funny. That's really what I mean. Okay, the maximum manner. Uh, these jokes are always interesting because they're very rare. Um, well, in terms of, okay, so maximum manner does a few things. Like I said, it's about brevity, obscurity, and ambiguity. So on the ambiguity and obscurity side, there's a lot of jokes. Of course, for ambiguity, there's a lot of jokes for structural and lexical ambiguity. Um, but I wanted to show a joke about brevity. So there's this joke called the longest joke in the world, and there's very many different variants of it. So can I just click on this? I can click on this. Oh, fine. Okay, so that'll take me there. And I can do video web. Okay, unfortunately, it's also the world's thinnest joke. Um, so no amount of zooming in is going to do much. But jokes like these are meant to be told in person. So I'll just scroll down as I talk about this. Um, so these are meant to be told in person. And the idea is you sit someone down and you get them ready for a joke. And as you say the joke, you get more and more animated. And people are expecting the punchline to happen soon and sooner and sooner and sooner. But the punchline never comes. People just wait for it for a long, long time. Sometimes it takes half an hour to tell the joke. Sometimes it takes an hour. Sometimes it takes 2 hours. But the punchline is never, ever worth it. So The humor itself in these jokes is not the joke itself, but rather how long it takes to tell the joke and how long people were strung along for the joke, because it's essentially a giant waste of time. Um, so you can see how long it took me to actually scroll through the entire thing. I don't know how many words this is, but it's it's a long joke. So the maximum manner here, you're violating brevity here, because a much shorter version of the joke could have been told and it would have been just as funny. But of course, it's not about the joke itself, it's about how long it is. So that's how the maximum manner can be violated for the purposes of humor. So um, all of these examples about violating the maxims for humor are just more examples of pragmatic incongruities. So we talked last time about temporal incongruities with the, um, you know, it's the winner of the do-it-yourself competition, um, and then the lobotomy example. Sorry, I forget the joke off the top of my head, but um, when you have two sentences back to back, there's an inference of time from one to another. These are just more examples of pragmatic incongruity. So beyond time, you can also violate or flout the maxims to get some humor out of that as well. So it's not just temporal incongruities that belong to pragmatic jokes. Um, but yeah, that is it for the examples of how the maxims relate to humor. So sort of a nice little way to end the course, in my opinion. Are there any questions about pragmatics and jokes and the maxims and humor? Okay. Well then, that brings us to the very end of the course then. So this was Ling 324 semantics. Now, I'm sure for many of you, this course was a little bit different than what you expected. Um, I had two main goals at the beginning of the course for you, which were to understand the fundamentals of formal semantics and to be able to read linguistics related material that is dense in notation, rigorous in definitions, and logically complex through looking at some mathematical notation in linguistics and rules and stuff like that. So although we didn't read any papers, I do hope that these two goals have been met. That one, you understand sort of the mathematical foundations and how linguistics and math are related. So even if you come out of this course thinking, I don't like mathematics or semantics isn't for me, that's fine. Like semantics and the mathematical side is not for everyone. And that's totally okay. It is okay to not be a mathematical linguistics person, but some knowledge of it is always good to have, especially if you want to do anything in the syntax side or if you're interested in any sort of computational linguistics. Just having a little bit of the basics goes a long way. And two, being able to sit through set theory and propositional logic and being able to do the trees. Um, a lot of it is guided during lecture. Uh, it's explained with pictures, but just being familiar with the notation. If you read papers now that has this sort of dense notation or mathematical notation, it's a little bit less intimidating. You can sit down now and you can say, hey, I recognize some of those symbols. I can understand what some of those things mean. And instead of just saying, I need to fill in all of these gaps, I need to figure out what all of this says. Now you just have to figure out what some of it means because you have a base for it. So I hope that those two goals in this course were met. Um, and that even if you don't continue with semantics, at least you can take some of that stuff out in the course, or some of that stuff with you, and it can be used in future courses. Um, so yeah, we started with some inferences. We went through set theory, logic, and we just sort of went through. It's all nicely related, which is nice. Um, what I want to say is that if you did like this course, there's sort of a follow-up course to this. It's not really a follow-up. It's just sort of another course that's like this. It's called LING 400, Formal Semantics. I'll write about this in a wrap-up post at the end of the course. It's very rarely taught, but instead of this course about meaning, it's sort of like this course, but about syntax. So it's like how powerful um, a system of grammar has to be to account for natural language. So we sort of built up this mathematical system of meaning, while Ling 400 builds up a mathematical system of grammar. So can you just use basic uh, arrow rewrite rules like A goes to little a and little b? Like, is that enough to build all of syntax? Or do you have to put trees inside of trees, or um, stuff like that? So it's another course that's like semantics, and it's usually taught by Dr. Chung Hei Han. And it's if you like this course, you'll like that course. Um, if you are interested in more semantics, we also have a graduate course at SFU called Ling 802, which is semantics. It's another course that's very rarely taught, and it's also very rarely open to undergraduates, but sometimes it is. Um, and the system that you use in that course is very slightly different than the system in this course. So we use like sets and predicate logic and propositional logic in our trees. And this is a system called set theoretic truth conditional semantics. And we use it in this course because we're starting from scratch. We're introducing this new mathematical system. And despite the abstract nature of this stuff and how new it is and how mathematical it is, sets are still things we can imagine. They're still groups of people or groups of happy things or group of objects that we can imagine if we need to. Um, but in modern research, this stuff is not used that much anymore. However, it is a great precursor to what is used in the modern world, which is functional truth conditional semantics. However, the difference between what we do and the functional stuff is like a difference between abstraction. And the graduate system is much, much, much harder to visualize and understand in a concrete sense. If we started with that system, we would not be able to explain it with pictures, with ideas, um, to be able to talk about X's and Y's as subjects and objects and actually think about sets and people. Um, so although the stuff in the course isn't as modern as something in a graduate course, just be aware that the reason we learn the system is one, for familiarity, and two, just so we have something concrete to work with, something that we can think about and visualize and draw, and to help learn the basics and get us grounded, especially when a lot of us don't have mathematical backgrounds. So, I mean, if you do read modern semantic papers and you say, "Hey, I don't understand a lot of this stuff," like, it's to be expected. And even after one graduate semantics course, there's still a lot of stuff after that that is still really difficult to understand, because semantics is a very broad field that cannot be learned in 13 or 26 weeks. So, I mean, where can you go from here? There is a whole um, functional truth conditional semantics, which is actually pretty quick to pick up once you understand how this stuff works. It's pretty easy to actually carry over, um, as long as you take some time to learn the notation. You can work with modals like should, would, ought, could that we talked about, um, gerunds, event semantics, time, and tense. You can put into those systems as well. Um, things like uh, Yeah, aspect, action start. Other languages is another whole aspect and field. Relative clauses, actually going into CPs and expanding them and doing movement for WH questions. Uh, Once you actually get into the deep syntax and what you've done in 322 and bringing it into semantics, you can get into a whole different world there. So that is it for this course. That's sort of the different things that you can go into if you are interested. Um, There's the computational linguistics side as well. But yeah, thanks for hanging out in the course. Hopefully, even if it wasn't what you expected, you enjoyed it. And hopefully it challenged you. I think it probably challenged a lot of you. Uh, but as always, as we wrap up the course, I know assignment 6 is challenging. We'll take a look at the grades at the end, see if there's any adjustments that need to be made. But again, uh, good job trying your best, putting the effort in. And good job sticking it out to the end of summer, too. So if you have any questions about assignment 6 still or test 3, you can hang out for a little bit longer. I'm happy to stay and answer those. Other than that, good luck on test 3 this Friday. Oh. On my schedule, I'll be holding extra office hours on Thursday from 11 a.m. to 12. You can also book any extra appointments you need with me, but I do have extra office hours at this time before Friday, in case you need them. Just letting you know. I'll put out an announcement too, but I have these extra hours just in case, in addition to Wednesday. Okay, one question. On the test 3 guide, it says the exam is available until Saturday, so it's been extended. Yes, I've extended. So it's going to be open on Friday. Oh, I don't have the test 3 guide here. Let me link that. First files, test 3 guide. Let's put that there. This is what it looks like on this side. Yeah, if anyone wants to go, enjoy the rest of your summer, enjoy the rest of your break. Good luck on everything. On this guide here, uh, I've extended it to Saturday at noon. So you can start it on Friday, August 6th at 9 a.m. and you can submit it by Saturday at noon. I mean, the reality is I'm not going to be able to mark it on Friday night. And some of you might want to do it Saturday morning. And there's a few international students who this time difference might help out. So why not? I've extended it. With assignment 6, what do I put for the NP that branches into D and NC? You do not need to put anything for that NP. You just need to fill out the NC and the noun itself. The quantifier, the D, and the NP, those 3 in that line should be blank. Sorry, this should be other way. Those ones should be blank. Also, assignment 6, learning and reinforcement, was extended to 11:59 p.m. tonight for basically the same reason. One, so you could ask questions for now, and also I likely can't mark them this afternoon, so I might as well give you an extra 12 hours, because if I can't work on them, then there's no reason why you shouldn't have extra time to work on them. Seems a little bit crazy for me to tell you to submit something when I can't actually start working on it right away. But yeah, are there any other questions about test 3 or assignment 6?
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry, for assignment 6.
Yep.
I'll just like post it, I think, on the chat, the exact part that I'm confused about. It's question 2, I believe. I'm just like not sure how to handle this this assignment function G part.
Okay. So, what this is saying is that, like, if you have, say, a free pronoun at the end of your derivation, and it's like a free pronoun that is like he won or she won or it won, then you'll just put like M prime in it. So this could be like Mary or Mark or whatever. And if it's T2 or he2 or she2, then it would be C prime or whatever. But
Oh,
if
so
you're
these only work for free pronouns then? Is that what you're
yes.
saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we refer to assignment functions when we're dealing with free pronouns. If you have, say, a bound pronoun or any sort of quantifier binding something, what you'll be doing is you'll be introducing a new variable and you'll be doing binding with it. Like you'll be doing for some D in the universe, D is a blank and blah, blah, blah. Or for all
Yeah.
D in the universe, if D is a blank, then blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the truth conditional meanings of quantified sentences lecture page at the very bottom, there is a pronoun practice exercise that is very similar to one on this assignment. I would check it out if you want an example of something similar to this.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah. For question 8 on assignment 6, does 25% of D and U include the cats or only the dogs, or is that something you should figure out? So you have to take a look at the description. So this one says, for example, D is an element of common nouns and S is true. So, okay, so this says for less than 25% of D in the universe, this is our universe. So yeah, so this is our universe. Our universe contains 20 purple dogs, 10 white dogs, and 170 white cats. So when you evaluate this bit right here, you should take all 200 animals into consideration. Same with this one. So this second universe contains 10 purple dogs, 50 white dogs, and 140 purple cats. So each one considers 200 different animals in the universe. And you'll have to take a look at this little description here for how to evaluate that. Why is it that we don't have to evaluate a bound pronoun using the assignment function? Okay, so I'm very slightly misspeaking here. We use the assignment function for bound pronouns, but we don't evaluate them to proper names with the assignment function. So, I think this is the best example here. Like, for example, with this part right here, SMGD/TI, this is like our binding here. When we bind with the assignment function for a bound pronoun, we use the assignment function for binding. So this is when we do like an assignment function replacement. But with free pronouns, we haven't done any binding. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring up the other slide just to have a better way to explain this. Okay. Let me go back to this one. So with free pronouns, like in John likes her, sorry, this is her with a J. We would need to see what J is in this case. Well, specifically who her J is in this case, because we don't know who her is based on the context of the sentence. So if we want to know when this is true, because we'd have to say it's one if John is in the set of X such that X likes, and we don't know who her is. So we need the assignment function to tell us who her is. But with bound pronouns, with like, say, some biologist thinks she is smart, we know who she is. We know that she is some biologist because she is referring to something else in the sentence. So if D is the biologist, then D is also she. So we don't need to check the assignment function to figure out who she is, because we know that this bound pronoun is the same thing that some biologist is. So when you establish in the sentence that you would say something like, for some D in our universe, D is in the biologist, and then you do some binding, sorry, MGD. So you'd replace D with whatever I was. That's true. And then later down the sentence, you'd say like D is in the set of X such that X is smart. Because D is the person who's smart, and D is also the biologist. So D in this case is she, and D is also the biologist. Sorry, this isn't always the best example because this is like an embedded sentence. So you have like another clause inside, and the ones that you do on your assignment don't have this because we don't know how to deal with that technically. But again, just check the examples at the bottom of the truth conditional meaning lecture page on Canvas for some pronoun practice exercises, and you can see how that's dealt with the itself, himself.
But we still need to use the assignment function for the question, right?
Yeah. So with bound pronouns, you still use the assignment function modification. So I need to be very careful with my words here. You use the assignment function in the tree, but you don't use the assignment function to evaluate it to a proper name. So like the information like G1 equals M prime, G2 equals C prime, like if there's no free pronoun, you don't need to use the fact that G1 equals M prime or G2 equals C prime. Like the specific assignments are for free pronouns. So these two sentences, he likes himself and every student likes himself, will show how to do binding on pronouns himself, while she likes him one and or she two likes him one and she three likes him one will show you how to use the assignment functions for free pronouns. So these ones will do bound pronouns and these ones will do free pronouns. I mean, like, give those an attempt first, but that is there for you after you've given it an attempt to take a look at it. And if you have any extra questions about that, please do ask. Were there any other questions?
I have another question actually. So in the slides, we have the example, a girl hit herself and herself is bound. So when we're writing it out, we just use D in the top sentence node. Is this because we don't have to evaluate it as a proper noun, is what you're saying? If that makes
Yeah, so we take a look at the top here. So what's happening is herself is a reflexive pronoun. So herself will always refer back to whatever that noun phrase is, a girl. So if D is a girl, then D is hitting D. So in predicate logic, this would look like D hits D, for example. So a girl hits herself. So the other key feature is that in our assignment functions, whatever has a 2 on it is also going to refer to the same thing. So whether it's T2 or whether it's she2 or whether it's herself 2, these will all change to D if we do an assignment function replacement. So when we do, if for some D in our universe, D is a girl, and we do this assignment function replacement, herself 2 is also going to change to D when we do that change. So this will say if for some D in our universe, D is a girl, and D, the girl, is in the set of X such that X hit D. So this is basically the part where you get D hits D, which is the girl hitting the girl.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think that seems to be everything. So if you do have anything more, feel free to stick around. Other than that, good luck this week. If you have any questions, see me in office hours or shoot me an email. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your day. See y'all. See y'all. See y'all.